The first missile screamed past Admiral Lillian Foster's F-16, so close she could smell the cordite through her oxygen mask. Her hands moved across the controls with surgical precision, rolling the aircraft into a knife-edge turn that would have blacked out a lesser pilot. Behind her, the enemy Apache helicopters were closing fast, their rotors beating the desert air into submission. "Viper 1, you've got 9 bandits on your 6, crackled the voice of her wingman through the static-filled comm. "Permission to engage?" Lillian's ice-blue eyes scanned the heads-up display, calculating angles and distances with the cold efficiency that had made her the youngest admiral in Navy history. The stolen F-16 beneath her was older than she'd prefer, but it would have to do. She'd liberated it from the compromised forward operating base just minutes before the entire facility went dark. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Negative, Phoenix," she replied, her voice steady despite the G-forces crushing her into the ejection seat. "I've got this." The second missile locked onto her heat signature. Lillian punched the chaff dispensers and pulled the aircraft into a vertical climb that defied physics and common sense. The Apache pilots were good, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed she was running from them. She wasn't running. She was positioning at 12,000 feet. Lillian rolled the F-16 inverted and dove toward the desert floor. The enemy formation spread out below her like pieces on a chessboard. Her targeting computer began painting solutions across her. Visor, 9 targets. 9 chances to end this before it escalated into something that could destabilize the entire region. General Marcus Kane had grabbed her arm back at the base, his fingers digging into her flight suit with desperate strength. "Foster, you can't do this alone," he'd said, his weathered face creased with concern and something else, something that looked like fear. "Let me call in reinforcements." She'd looked down at his hand, then back up at his face with the expression that had earned her the call sign Ice Queen among the junior officers. "Sir, with respect, you need to let go of my aircraft. And if you don't remove your hand in the next 3 seconds, I'm going to break it." Kane had been a decent commanding officer, but he'd never understood that sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. He'd hesitated just long enough for Lillian to demonstrate that she wasn't bluffing about his hand. The crack of his wrist bones breaking had been audible even over the roar of the F-16's engine spooling up now, diving toward the Apache formation. At nearly 600 miles per hour, Lillian allowed herself a grim smile. Kane would be fine. Field medics were excellent at setting broken bones. But his lack of vision would have gotten a lot more people killed than just the 2 of them. The lead Apache pilot was experienced. She could tell by his formation flying. But experience meant patterns, and patterns meant predictability. As her F-16 screamed downward, Lillian armed her weapon systems and prepared to show these helicopter pilots why fixed-wing aircraft ruled the sky. Her finger hovered over the trigger. 9 targets. 1 chance to prevent a war. The hunt was about to begin. 3 hours earlier, Admiral Lillian Foster had been reviewing intelligence reports in the air-conditioned comfort of the operations center at Forward Operating Base Dagger, nestled in the unforgiving landscape of the Kallar Desert. The base, a testament to military engineering, housed 3,000 personnel and represented the United States' most advanced foothold in the region. Its runways could accommodate everything from massive C-17 cargo planes to the sleek F-35 Lightning II fighters that formed the backbone of their air superiority mission. Lillian stood before a wall of monitors displaying satellite feeds, drone footage, and tactical overlays that painted a real-time picture of the regional security situation. At 34, she was the youngest person ever to wear Admiral stars, a distinction that came with both respect and resentment from her peers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the kind of focus That made subordinates straighten their postures without conscious thought. "Ma'am, we've got movement in Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, her intelligence officer. Chen was brilliant, with a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown and a talent for pattern recognition that bordered on supernatural. She'd been the one to spot the irregularities in shipping manifests that led to the interdiction of 3 arms smuggling operations in the past 6 months. Lillian leaned over Chun's shoulder, studying the thermal imagery on the screen. "How many vehicles?" "Initial count shows 47, ma'am. Mixed convoy, looks like modified pickup trucks, several armored personnel carriers, and at least 3 vehicles that don't match our database." Chun's fingers danced across her keyboard, pulling up enhanced images and classification algorithms. "Sir, these aren't insurgent forces. The coordination, the equipment, this is military-grade organization." The implications hit Lillian immediately. For the past 2 years, she'd been tracking the movements of the Counter Liberation Army, a well-funded separatist group that had been conducting increasingly sophisticated attacks against government forces. But this convoy represented a massive escalation in their capabilities. The KLA had historically operated in cells of 5 to 10 fighters. This was an army. "Get me Major Rodriguez," Lillian ordered, straightening to her full 5'8" height. "I want to know everything about this convoy, origin, destination, and what the hell they're carrying that requires that much firepower to protect." Major Carlos Rodriguez was Lillian's operations officer, a former Marine aviator who'd transitioned to joint operations after losing his left eye to shrapnel during the siege of Kandahar. His remaining eye was sharp as ever, and his tactical mind had saved countless lives during the turbulent early months of Operation Desert Shield. When he appeared in the doorway of the operations center, his expression was grim. "Admiral, we've got problems," Rodriguez said without preamble. "That convoy isn't just moving through Sector 7. They're heading directly for the Massacre Valley." Lillian felt ice crystallize in her stomach. The Massacre Valley housed nearly 50,000 civilians, most of them refugees from the conflicts that had raged across the region for the better part of a decade. The valley's strategic importance came not just from its population, but from its location. It controlled access to 3 major transportation routes that connected the region's economic centers. "Timeline to intercept?" she asked. "With conventional forces, 6 hours minimum," Rodriguez replied. "But Admiral, there's something else. We've been monitoring communications traffic, and there's chatter about a final solution for the valley. These aren't raiders looking for supplies. This is ethnic cleansing." The words hung in the air like smoke from a forest fire, acrid and suffocating. Lillian had seen the aftermath of such operations during her deployments in the Balkans and East Africa. Images of mass graves and burning villages were seared into her memory, fuel for the nightmares that still visited her in the small hours of the morning. "What assets do we have available for immediate deployment?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the fury building behind her calm exterior. Chun pulled up the force readiness board. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons, 1 F-35, a Lightning II, and a squadron of A-10 Thunderbolts. "But Admiral, the A-10s are configured for close air support, not interdiction. And the F-35 is down for maintenance, hydraulic issues that won't be resolved for at least 4 hours. Ground forces? 3rd Battalion is conducting training exercises. 60 clicks north," Rodriguez said. "Even with helicopter transport, we're looking at 90 minutes minimum to get boots on the ground in the valley. And that convoy will be there in 70 minutes. Lillian stared at the tactical display, her mind running through scenarios with computer-like precision. Every option seemed to involve accepting unacceptable casualties among the civilian population. The mathematics of modern warfare were brutally simple. You could save some people quickly, or save more people slowly. But you couldn't save everyone. "Ma'am," Chun said quietly. There is one other option. Lillian turned toward her intelligence officer, noting the hesitation in Chun's normally confident demeanor. Speak. The F-16s are loaded with full air-to-ground ordnance packages. AGM-65 Mavericks, cluster munitions, the works. In theory, a single aircraft could ... Could what, Commander? Engage 47 vehicles single-handedly? Rodriguez's voice carried the skepticism of someone who'd seen too many good pilots die attempting impossible missions. Chun met Lillian's gaze directly. Ma'am, your combat record shows 17 confirmed air-to-air kills and 34 successful ground strikes. You've flown combat missions in 4 different theaters. If anyone could. Stop, Lillian said, but her mind was already working through the tactical possibilities. A single F-16, properly handled, could indeed engage multiple ground targets. The key would be maximizing the psychological impact while neutralizing the most dangerous threats. Take out the command vehicles first, scatter the formation, then pick off the remainder before they could regroup. It was audacious to the point of insanity. It was also the only option that gave the civilians in Massacre Valley a fighting chance. Admiral, Rodriguez said, even if the ground attack succeeded, that convoy isn't traveling alone. Intelligence suggests they have air support. At least 3 Mi-24 Hind gunships, possibly more. You'd be facing overwhelming odds. Lillian nodded slowly. Rodriguez was right, of course. The Mi-24 Hind was a formidable adversary, a flying tank that had earned its reputation in countless conflicts across 3 decades. Its twin engines could push the aircraft to over 200 miles per hour, and its weapons package included both air-to-air missiles and a devastating array of rockets and cannon designed to shred ground targets. But Hinds were also predictable. Their pilots were trained in Soviet-era tactics that emphasized overwhelming firepower over maneuverability. And Lillian had been studying those tactics since her days at the Naval War College. Chun, get me everything we have on KLA air assets. She ordered. I want to know how many pilots they have, what their training backgrounds are, and what kind of combat experience they're carrying. Admiral, you're not seriously considering, Rodriguez began. Major, I need you to coordinate with the 3rd Battalion, Lillian interrupted. Even if I can delay that convoy, we'll need ground forces in position to secure the valley and provide humanitarian assistance. Work with the UN representatives to establish refugee processing centers outside the combat zone. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment, then nodded sharply. He'd served under Lillian long enough to recognize when her mind was made up. Arguing would only waste precious time. Chun's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up files from military intelligence databases across 3 continents. Admiral, the KLA has been recruiting pilots from former Soviet bloc countries. We've identified at least 6 individuals with combat experience from conflicts in Chechnya, Georgia, and Syria. These aren't amateur insurgents, they're professional. Military aviators. Equipment? 3 confirmed Mi-24 Hinds, possibly a 4th. 2 Mi-17 HIP transport helicopters. And Admiral ... Chun paused, her face pale. There are unconfirmed reports of a Ka-50 Black Shark attack helicopter. If true, that changes everything. The Ka-50 was a different beast entirely, a single seat. Attack helicopter with contra-rotating rotors that eliminated the need for a tail rotor. It was faster and more maneuverable than the Hind, with advanced avionics and weapon systems that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. Facing a Ka-50 in air-to-air combat would push even Lillian's considerable skills to their absolute limit. Confirmation status on the Black Shark, she asked. 70% confidence based on electronic signatures detected 3 days ago, Chun replied. But Admiral, even without the Ka-50, you'd be facing odds of at least 3 to 1, possibly more. Lillian walked to the large window that overlooked the base's primary runway. Two F-16C fighting Falcons sat in their hardened shelters, their angular forms bristling with weapons pylons loaded for bear. Each aircraft carried enough ordnance to level a city block, but ordnance was useless without a pilot skilled enough to deliver it accurately under extreme duress. Behind her, she could hear Chun and Rodriguez quietly discussing evacuation protocols and casualty estimates. Their voices carried the professional detachment that military personnel developed when contemplating scenarios too horrible to process emotionally. 50,000 civilians versus acceptable losses in military personnel. The calculus of warfare reduced human lives to numbers on a spreadsheet. Lillian had joined the Navy 17 years ago because she believed in protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. She'd climbed the ranks not through political maneuvering or family connections, but by consistently demonstrating that she could accomplish missions others deemed impossible. Her personnel file contained commendations from 4 different presidents and recommendations for promotion that used words like exceptional, irreplaceable, and the finest naval aviator of her generation. But none of those accolades meant anything if she couldn't find a way to save the people in Massacre Valley. "Admiral," Rodriguez called softly. "What are your orders?" Lillian turned from the window, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that came only in moments of absolute crisis. "Prep both F-16s for immediate launch. Full air-to-ground loadout on mine, air-to-air configuration on the second bird." "Ma'am." With respect, General Kane specifically ordered. "General Kane isn't here, Major. I am." Lillian's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under impossible pressure. The general's strategic vision is admirable, but those civilians don't have time for strategic vision. They need tactical solutions, and they need them now. Rodriguez nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Admiral, even if you neutralize the ground convoy, you'll be flying into contested airspace with minimal support. The odds improve dramatically once I eliminate their air cover," Lillian replied. "Chun, I need you to coordinate with satellite reconnaissance. I want real-time positioning on every aircraft in that formation. And see if you can tap into their communications. If we can monitor their tactical chatter, it'll give us a significant advantage." Chun's eyes lit up with understanding. "Ma'am, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you'll need to know their flight patterns and engagement protocols. Give me 10 minutes, and I can have their entire communications package decoded." "You have 5 minutes," Lillian said. "After that, I'm wheels up regardless." As Chun bent to her task, Rodriguez moved closer to Lillian's position near the window. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Admiral, I've flown with you long enough to know that look in your eyes. You're not just planning to delay that convoy. You're planning to destroy it completely." Lillian met his gaze without flinching. "Major, those helicopters are carrying enough firepower to level half the valley before any ground forces can respond. The convoy is transporting chemical weapons, I'm certain of it. And if I'm right, we're not looking at ethnic cleansing. We're looking at genocide." The word hung between them like a death sentence. Rodriguez had seen chemical attacks during his deployment in Syria, had witnessed the aftermath of nerve agent strikes against civilian populations. The images were burned into his memory with the kind of clarity that no amount of alcohol or therapy could erase. "How can you be certain about the chemical weapons?" he asked. "Because conventional weapons don't require that level of air protection," Lillian replied. 9 helicopters to escort 1 convoy? That's not paranoia, that's operational security for something catastrophically dangerous. And the electronic signatures Chen detected matched the profile for specialized transportation containers designed to handle volatile chemical compounds. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and the picture they formed was nightmare fuel for anyone with a functioning conscience. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to maintain communications with regional command." and keep them updated on the situation. If this goes sideways, they need to know exactly what happened and why. And Rodriguez. Lillian paused, choosing her words carefully. If I don't make it back, I need you to make sure Chin gets promoted. She's too good to waste in this assignment. Admiral, you're talking like this is a suicide mission. Lillian smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Major, I've been flying suicide missions since I was 22 years old. The only difference is that this time, I'm choosing to fly it instead of having it assigned to me. She turned and walked toward the equipment lockers where her flight gear waited. The ritual of suiting up for combat was one she'd performed hundreds of times, but it never lost its solemnity. Each piece of equipment represented the difference between life and death at 30,000 feet, where the margin for error was measured in microseconds and the price of failure was absolute. Her G-suit was custom-fitted, designed to compress her legs and torso during high G maneuvers to prevent blood from pooling away from her brain. The helmet contained communications equipment, heads-up display projectors, and oxygen delivery systems that would keep her conscious and alert even under conditions that would incapacitate most human beings. Her survival vest held emergency beacons, water purification tablets, and a sidearm that she hoped never to use but carried with the grim acceptance of someone who understood that hope was a luxury combat pilots couldn't afford. As she completed her equipment checks, Chun appeared with a tablet containing the decoded enemy communications. Admiral, you were right about their organization level. These pilots are using modified NATO tactical protocols. Someone's been training them extensively. Lillian scanned the intercepts, noting call signs, formation preferences, and engagement procedures that showed a level of sophistication far beyond typical insurgent operations. Foreign advisors? Almost certainly. The syntax pattern suggests Russian military training, but adapted for desert operations. These pilots know what they're doing. Good, Lillian said, surprising Chun with her response. Amateurs are unpredictable. Professionals follow protocols, and protocols can be exploited. She strapped on her helmet and picked up her flight bag, a battered leather satchel that had accompanied her through 17 years of combat operations. Inside were emergency rations, additional survival equipment, and a small leather journal where she recorded her thoughts before each mission. Today's entry was shorter than usual: 50,000 civilians. 9 targets. Mathematics of conscience. The walk to the flight line took 3 minutes, during which Lillian's mind shifted into the focused state that had kept her alive through air-to-air combat over the Balkans, close air support missions in Afghanistan, and reconnaissance flights over North Korea that officially never happened. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate stabilized, and the world around her took on the crystalline clarity that preceded violence. The F-16C. Waiting on the tarmac was tail number 892104, an aircraft with its own distinguished service record. Built in 1989, it had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts and accumulated over 4,000 flight hours without a single major system failure. The ground crew had loaded it with a mixed ordnance package optimized for both air-to-air and air-to-ground engagement. 2 AIM-12 OM-RAM missiles for long-range air targets, 2 AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles for close-in dogfighting, 4 AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles, and a 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon loaded with 511 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the crew chief, approached as Lillian completed her pre-flight inspection. Santos had been maintaining F-16s for 12 years and could diagnose engine problems by the sound of the turbine spin-up. Her crew was responsible for keeping the base's fighter aircraft in perfect operational condition, a task that required equal parts technical expertise and artistic intuition. "She's ready to fly, Admiral," Santos reported. "All systems green, weapons hot, fuel topped off, but ma'am." She hesitated, glancing toward the operations center where General Kane's silhouette was visible through the windows. "The general's been trying to reach you on secure comm. Something about standing down the mission." Lillian paused in her inspection of the aircraft's left main landing gear. Kane was a competent commanding officer, but he was also a product of the military's risk-averse institutional culture that had evolved over the past 2 decades. He preferred overwhelming force applied through careful planning and extensive coordination, an approach that worked well in conventional warfare but was less effective when time was the critical factor. "Sergeant Santos, did you personally verify the weapon systems?" "Yes, ma'am. Triple-checked all connections, tested the targeting computers, verified ordnance safety systems. This bird is locked and loaded. And the auxiliary fuel tank? Topped off and pressure tested. You've got maximum range and loiter time." Lillian nodded, satisfied. Santos and her crew were among the best in the business, the kind of professional maintainers who took personal pride in ensuring that their pilots came home safely. They understood that their work was the foundation upon which successful missions were built. "Sergeant, when General Kane asks where I went, tell him I'm conducting a reconnaissance flight to assess the tactical situation." Santos smiled grimly. "Yes, ma'am. And Admiral? Give those bastards hell." Lillian climbed the ladder to the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat with the familiarity of someone returning home. The F-16's cockpit was an environment she understood better than her own apartment. Every switch and display positioned exactly where her muscle memory expected them to be. She began the startup sequence, the twin engines of the Pratt & Whitney F-100 turbofan engine coming online with a rising whine that spoke of barely contained power. "Dagger control, this is Viper 1 requesting immediate takeoff clearance," she transmitted over the tower frequency. "Viper 1, Dagger control. You are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Winds are light and variable. Admiral, be advised that General Kane is requesting your presence in the operations center immediately. Dagger control, Viper 1 copies winds. Advise the General that I'll debrief him upon mission completion." Before the tower controller could respond, Lillian advanced the throttles to military power and released the wheel brakes. The F-16 surged forward, pressing her back into the seat as 15,000 pounds of thrust accelerated the aircraft down the runway. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick, and the fighter leaped into the desert sky like a predator scenting prey. At 5,000 feet, she banked southeast toward Sector 7, the sun glinting off her canopy as the ground fell away beneath her. Behind her, she could see the sprawling complex of Phobe Dagger growing smaller in her mirrors, its geometric pattern stark against the flowing curves of the desert landscape. Her radio crackled with General Kane's voice, tight with controlled anger. "Admiral Foster, return to base immediately." "That is a direct order." Lillian switched off her radio and smiled coldly. She'd ask for forgiveness later, assuming there was a later. Right now, 50,000 civilians were depending on her to prove that sometimes one person could make all the difference in the world. The hunt was beginning, and Admiral Lillian Foster was done playing by anyone's rules except her own. General Marcus Kane stood in the operations center, watching the blue triangle that represented Admiral Foster's F-16 streak across the tactical display toward what he was certain would be either a court-martial or a posthumous Medal of Honor ceremony. His right wrist throbbed where the field medic had applied the emergency splint, but the pain was nothing compared to the sick certainty growing in his stomach. Kane had commanded troops in combat for over 20 years, from his days as a young lieutenant leading infantry patrols in urban warfare zones to his current position, overseeing joint operations across a region that seemed perpetually balanced on the knife's edge of chaos. He'd made the hard decisions that came with command responsibility, had written letters to the families of soldiers who wouldn't be coming home, and had learned to compartmentalize the emotional cost of military leadership, but he'd never watched Someone under his command deliberately fly into a situation where survival was statistically impossible. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Chun said quietly, "Admiral Foster is approaching the convoy's projected position. Current speed indicates should be in engagement range in approximately 12 minutes. Kane studied the tactical display, noting the positions of various units scattered across hundreds of square miles of desert terrain. The 3rd Battalion was making good time toward Massacre Valley, but they were still an hour away from being able to provide meaningful support. The convoy itself was moving faster than initially projected, suggesting that its commanders were aware they were being tracked. "Any change in the convoy's air escort?" he asked. "Negative, sir. Still showing 3 helicopter contacts maintaining overwatch positions. But General..." Shun hesitated, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "We're picking up additional electronic signatures. It's possible there are more aircraft in the area, operating under emissions control." The implications were sobering. Electronic emissions control meant that additional enemy aircraft were present, but maintaining radio silence and minimizing their radar signatures. It was a tactic typically employed when setting up ambushes or when protecting high-value assets that required absolute operational security. Kane felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Every decision he made would have consequences that rippled outward in ways he couldn't fully predict. Send reinforcements after Foster, and he'd be committing additional assets to what might be a trap. Leave her unsupported, and he'd be abandoning one of the Navy's most capable pilots to face overwhelming odds alone. "Sir, incoming priority communication." From CENTCOM, reported communications specialist First Class Janet Murphy from her position at the Secure Communications Console. Murphy had been handling classified traffic for 8 years and could recognize the electronic signatures of various command authorities by the encryption protocols they employed. Kane accepted the handset, noting the serious expression on Murphy's face. When CENTCOM called during active operations, it usually meant that someone in a very high position was taking personal interest in the situation. "Kane here. General, this is Admiral Patricia Blackwood, CENTCOM Deputy Commander." Blackwood's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to briefing presidents and cabinet secretaries. "I'm calling regarding the situation developing in your area of operations. What's Admiral Foster's current status?" Kane glanced at the tactical display, where the blue triangle representing Foster's F-16 was now less than 10 minutes from contact with hostile forces. "Admiral Foster is conducting a reconnaissance mission to assess enemy capabilities and intentions." "General, we both know that's not entirely accurate. Our satellite assets show a single F-16 approaching a numerically superior enemy formation with clear hostile intent. What's Foster's real mission status?" Kane closed his eyes briefly, recognizing that CENTCOM's oversight capabilities were far more comprehensive than he'd hoped. "Admiral Foster is attempting to prevent what we believe to be an imminent chemical weapons attack against civilian populations in the Massacre Valley." "Chemical weapons?" "General, that's a significant escalation in threat assessment. What's your intelligence confidence level?" "Moderate to high confidence based on convoy composition, security measures, and communications intercepts," Kane replied. Admiral Foster determined that immediate action was necessary to prevent massive civilian casualties. "And you authorize this action?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Kane understood that his answer would determine not just Foster's fate, but potentially his own career and the future of operations in the region. He could claim that Foster had exceeded her authority and launch a case for court-martial. Or he could accept responsibility for a mission that violated standing orders regarding engagement without proper authorization. "Admiral Foster is operating under my authority," he said finally. "The tactical situation required immediate response, and she represents our best available asset for the mission." "Understood, General." Are you requesting additional support for the operation? Kane blinked in surprise. He'd expected censure, possibly relief from command. Instead, CENTCOM was offering reinforcements. Admiral, what additional assets are available? We can have a flight of F-22 Raptors over your position in 90 minutes. Additionally, there's a guided missile destroyer approximately 200 nautical miles offshore that can provide cruise missile support if you can designate targets. The F-22s won't arrive in time to support Admiral Foster's initial engagement, Kane noted. And cruise missiles won't be effective against mobile targets in mountainous terrain. General, I understand the timeline constraints. But if Admiral Foster's assessment is correct, this operation has implications far beyond your immediate area of responsibility. Chemical weapons usage represents a red line that we cannot allow to be crossed. Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the operations center's aggressive air conditioning. When senior commanders started talking about red lines and regional implications, it usually meant that a local tactical problem was about to become a strategic nightmare with international consequences. Admiral Blackwood, what's the current threat assessment at the strategic level? General, that's above your classification level. But I can tell you that this convoy represents more than an isolated insurgent operation. We believe it's a test case for tactics that could be employed across multiple theaters if successful. The pieces were beginning to form a picture that Kane didn't like. The KLA wasn't just attempting to seize control of a valley filled with refugees. They were conducting a proof-of-concept operation for chemical warfare tactics that could be replicated by insurgent groups worldwide. If they succeeded in Massacre Valley, every terrorist organization from the Philippines to Somalia would be taking notes. Ma'am, request permission to launch additional support for Admiral Foster's mission. Permission granted. But General, understand that this operation is now classified at the highest levels. All communications regarding mission details are to be restricted to essential personnel only. Kane nodded, though Admiral Blackwood couldn't see the gesture through the secure voice link. Understood, ma'am. We'll maintain operational security protocols. General, one more thing. Admiral Foster's personnel file indicates exceptional performance under extreme conditions. Her psychological profile suggests someone who performs optimally when facing impossible odds. Is that assessment accurate? Kane glanced at the tactical display, where Foster's F-16 was now less than 5 minutes from contact with enemy forces. Admiral Lillian Foster is the most capable pilot I've ever served with. If anyone can pull off an impossible mission, it's her. Good, because if she fails, we may be looking at the beginning of a new type of warfare that our current doctrine isn't equipped to handle. The communication ended, leaving Kane staring at tactical screens filled with moving icons that represented human lives hanging in the balance. He just committed his command to supporting an operation that violated multiple standing orders, based on the tactical judgment of a pilot who was currently flying alone into what intelligence suggested was a carefully prepared ambush. Lieutenant Commander Chun, he called out. Status on enemy communications intercepts. Chun looked up from her banks of computer screens, her expression troubled. Sir, we've broken their encryption, but what we're hearing is disturbing. The convoy commanders are discussing test protocols and effectiveness assessments. This isn't just about targeting civilians. They're treating the valley as an experimental laboratory. For what kind of experiments? Chemical agent dispersal patterns in confined geographical areas. Casualty rates versus agent concentration. Response times for international humanitarian organizations. Chun's voice was steady, but Kane could see the revulsion in her eyes. Sir, they're planning to document everything for future reference. Kane felt bile rising in his throat. The clinical detachment required to treat human suffering as experimental data represented a level of moral bankruptcy that challenged his understanding of human nature. He'd fought against enemies motivated by ideology, economics, and territorial ambition. But this was something different. Evil reduced to its purest, most systematic form. "Have you shared this intelligence with Admiral Foster?" "Yes, sir. I transmitted the relevant portions on burst communication 30 seconds ago." Kane nodded, knowing that the intelligence would only strengthen Foster's resolve to prevent the attack. She'd lost family members during the chemical attacks in Syria 7 years ago, an uncle who'd been working with doctors without borders when nerve agents had been deployed against a refugee camp. The attack had killed over 300 people, including 47 medical personnel who'd been trying to provide humanitarian assistance. Foster had never spoken about the incident directly, but Kane had read her psychological evaluation reports. The loss had crystallized her commitment to protecting civilian populations and had contributed to her reputation for accepting high-risk missions when innocent lives were at stake. "Sir," Chun continued, "there's something else. The intercept suggests this convoy isn't the only one. We're looking at coordinated attacks across at least 3 different locations, possibly more." Kane felt the situation expanding beyond his ability to control it, like watching a small fire spread into a conflagration that would consume everything in its path. Other locations? The communications reference Phase 2 and Phase 3 operations, with target locations designated as Sierra, Mike, and Papa. We haven't identified the actual geographical locations yet, but the timing suggests near simultaneous attacks. "Get me CENTCOM immediately," Kane ordered. "Priority Alpha classification. And Chun, I want you to start tracking every chemical weapons storage facility, transportation route, and research facility in the region. If this is part of a larger operation, we need to understand the full scope before it's too late to respond effectively." As Chun bent to her task, Kane found himself staring at the tactical display where Admiral Foster's F-16 was represented by a single blue triangle approaching a cluster of red diamonds that marked the enemy formation. The symbols were clean and precise, devoid of the human drama unfolding at 500 miles per hour above the desert floor. In less than 5 minutes, Foster would begin engaging targets that outnumbered her 9-to-1. Her success or failure would determine whether 50,000 civilians lived or died, and whether a new form of warfare would be born in the crucible of the Kahlar Desert. Kane had been a soldier long enough to understand that some battles were won or lost in the first few seconds of contact. Everything that followed was merely the universe working out the mathematical consequences of decisions made in those crucial initial moments. Admiral Lillian Foster was about to discover whether mathematics or willpower would prevail in the skies. Above Masar Valley, the enemy convoy appeared on Lillian's heads-up display as a string of thermal signatures crawling across the desert floor like phosphorescent insects. From 12,000 feet, the vehicles looked deceptively small, but her targeting computer was already calculating their actual dimensions and threat levels. The largest signatures belonged to modified T-80 main battle tanks, weapons of war that had no legitimate purpose in what the KLA claimed was a humanitarian mission. "Viper 1, this is Overwatch," crackled Chun's voice through the encrypted communications channel. "Confirm visual contact with primary targets." "Affirmative, Overwatch." "Count 47 vehicles in convoy formation. Identifying priority targets now." Lillian's thumb moved across the targeting system controls, painting laser designations on the most dangerous elements of the formation. The T-80 tanks would be her first priority. Their armor was too thick for most of her ordnance, but their ammunition storage compartments represented catastrophic vulnerabilities if she could achieve precise hits. Her radar warning receiver remained silent, indicating that the enemy air assets hadn't yet detected her presence. The Apache helicopters were maintaining a standard escort pattern 3 miles ahead of the convoy, their attention focused on potential ground threats rather than aerial attack. It was a tactical mistake that Lillian intended to exploit ruthlessly. Overwatch Viper 1, beginning attack run. Target priority: enemy air assets, then armored vehicles, then soft targets. Copy, Viper 1. Be advised, satellite imagery shows additional vehicles joining the convoy from the north. Current count is now 53 vehicles total. Lillian cursed under her breath. The convoy was growing even as she prepared to engage, suggesting coordination with additional KLA forces that intelligence hadn't detected. But the mission parameters remained the same: stop the attack on Nassar Valley by any means necessary. She armed her first AIM-120 AMRAAM missile and began her descent toward the enemy formation. The AMRAAM was a fire-and-forget weapon with its own active radar guidance system, capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 60 miles. But at closer ranges, its kill probability increased dramatically, and Lillian intended to get very close indeed. At 8,000 feet, the lead Apache helicopter finally detected her approach. She watched its thermal signature change as the aircraft banked hard left, its pilot broadcasting warnings to the other helicopters in rapid Arabic. Lillian's language training allowed her to understand enough of the transmission to know that the enemy pilots were professional, disciplined, and very, very good. All Kestrel flight, we have incoming fighter aircraft. Break formation and engage immediately. The Apache formation scattered like startled birds, each helicopter seeking to maximize its maneuverability while bringing weapons to bear on the diving F-16. Lillian noted their tactics with professional appreciation. These weren't militia pilots flying stolen aircraft. These were military-trained aviators with extensive combat experience, which meant they were also predictable. Lillian rolled inverted and pulled the F-16 into a diving spiral that brought her directly behind the trailing Apache. Her targeting computer achieved lock, and she fired the AMRAAM from a range of 12 miles. The missile separated from its pylon with a burst of white smoke and accelerated toward its target, its guidance system painting the Apache with radar energy that the helicopter's defensive systems couldn't evade. The Apache pilot tried desperately to break lock, dispensing chaff and flares while pulling his aircraft into a climbing turn that stressed the rotor system beyond design limits. But the AMRAAM was faster and smarter, adjusting its trajectory with mechanical precision until it impacted the helicopter's engine compartment in a brilliant orange fireball. 1 down. 8 to go. The remaining Apache helicopters were converging on her position, their pilots coordinating attack vectors with the kind of tactical sophistication that suggested extensive training and rehearsal. Lillian noted their formation discipline, even as she maneuvered to avoid the stream of 30mm cannon fire that began tracking across the sky around her. Aircraft. Her second AMRAAM found its mark 6 seconds later, striking an Apache that had been attempting to climb above her operational altitude. The explosion sent debris cascading across the desert floor, but Lillian was already moving toward her next target, the F-16 dancing through the air like a deadly ballet. Viper 1, Overwatch. Be advised, we're tracking additional airborne contacts approaching from the east. Count 3, possibly 4 additional helicopters. Lillian felt her tactical situation shifting from challenging to desperate. 7 enemy helicopters remaining from the original formation, plus 3 or 4 additional aircraft approaching. She was facing odds that would have challenged an entire squadron of fighters. But retreating wasn't an option, not with 50,000 civilians depending on her success. She armed her first AIM-9X Sidewinder missile and began hunting for targets. The Sidewinder was a heat-seeking weapon optimized for close-range combat, with a guidance system so sensitive it could track the thermal signature of an aircraft's skin friction at distances up to 20 miles. More importantly, its smaller size and higher maneuverability made it ideal for the kind of knife fight aerial combat she was about to enter. The lead Apache pilot was good, very good. He'd managed to position his aircraft to take advantage of the sun's glare while maintaining a firing solution on Lillian's F-16. His 30mm cannon began tracking toward her position, the projectiles large enough to punch through the fighter's aluminum skin and destroy critical systems. Lillian pulled the F-16 into a vertical climb, using the aircraft's superior power-to-weight ratio to escape the helicopter's engagement envelope. At the top of her climb, she rolled inverted and dove back toward the Apache formation, her targeting computer painting solutions on multiple targets simultaneously. The Sidewinder left its rail with a characteristic growl, its infrared seeker head immediately locking onto the heat signature of the nearest Apache's exhaust system. The helicopter pilot detected the missile launch and began evasive maneuvers, but the confined airspace above the convoy limited his options. The missile impacted his aircraft's tail rotor assembly, sending the Apache spinning toward the ground. In an uncontrolled UTOROTATION. 2 down. 6 remaining from the original formation, plus the unknowns approaching from the east. Lillian's radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with multiple threat indicators as the approaching helicopters finally revealed their presence. Her blood ran cold as she identified the electronic signatures: 1 Ka-50 Black Shark attack helicopter and 3 additional Mi-24 Hinds, all operating with advanced electronic warfare systems that had been masking their approach. She was now facing 10 enemy aircraft with 2 missiles remaining and a cannon that, while effective, required her to get close enough for the enemy to engage her with everything they had. Overwatch Viper 1. Confirm 10 bandits total, including 1 Ka-50. Request immediate support. Viper 1. Overwatch. Support is en route, but ETA is 45 minutes minimum. You're alone out there. Alone, the word echoed in Lillian's mind as she watched the enemy aircraft converging on her position with the inexorable precision of a closing trap. She'd flown solo missions before, but never against odds this overwhelming. The mathematics of aerial combat were brutally simple, superior numbers usually won, regardless of individual pilot skill, but mathematics didn't account for desperation, creativity, or the willingness to accept risks that sane people would consider suicidal. Lillian armed her remaining Sidewinder and began what she privately thought of as the dance of death, a series of high-G maneuvers designed to keep multiple enemies from achieving firing solutions while positioning herself for counterattack opportunities. The F-16 responded to her inputs like an extension of her own body, rolling and climbing, and diving through 3-dimensional space with grace that belied its deadly purpose. The Ka-50 pilot was trying to position himself above the engagement, where his aircraft's superior sensors and weapon systems would give him a decisive advantage. Lillian couldn't allow that to happen. She pulled the F-16 into a climb that brought her directly into the Black Shark's engagement envelope, gambling that her speed advantage would allow her to get close enough for a missile shot before the helicopter could respond. The gamble paid off. Her second Sidewinder achieved lock just as the Ka-50's pilot realized the danger he was in. The missile impacted the helicopter's sensor array, not destroying the aircraft but blinding its targeting systems and forcing it to withdraw from the immediate combat area. 3 down, 7 wounded. But Lillian was now out of air-to-air missiles. With 7 fully functional enemy helicopters still in the fight, she rolled the F-16, inverted, and dove toward the convoy itself, her targeting computer shifting to air-to-ground mode as she prepared to engage the vehicles that represented the ultimate threat to the civilians in Massacre Valley. Her 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles were designed specifically for this kind of target, each one capable of destroying a main battle tank with a single hit. The convoy had dispersed upon detecting her approach, the vehicles spreading out across several square miles of desert terrain to minimize damage from any single attack. But dispersion was a double-edged sword. It reduced their collective defensive capability while making individual vehicles more vulnerable to precision strikes. Lillian's first Maverick left its pylon with a burst of rocket exhaust, its television guidance system allowing her to steer the weapon directly into the engine compartment of the lead T-80 tank. The explosion sent a mushroom cloud of black smoke and orange flame 500 feet into the air, the tank's ammunition storage detonating in a secondary blast that shook the ground for miles around. Her second Maverick found another tank, and her third took out what appeared to be a command vehicle bristling with communications antennas. But the fourth Maverick malfunctioned, its guidance system failing during the terminal phase of flight, causing the missile to impact harmlessly in the desert sand 50 meters from its intended target. 3 vehicles destroyed, 50 remaining, and 7 Apache helicopters were now converging on her position with their weapon systems armed and ready. Lillian pulled the F-16 into another climb, but this time the Apache pilots were ready for her tactics. They'd coordinated their attack to cover all possible escape routes, their 30mm cannons creating a web of high explosive projectiles that filled the sky around her aircraft. She felt the F-16 shudder as several rounds impacted her left wing, but the damage indicators remained green. The aircraft was built to absorb punishment and keep flying, a philosophy that had saved countless pilots' lives over the fighter's 4 decades of service. But even the F-16 had limits, and Lillian was about to test them. Viper 1, Overwatch. Your aircraft is taking damage. Recommend immediate egress from the combat area. Negative Overwatch. Mission incomplete. Lillian armed her 20mm cannon and began the most dangerous phase of her attack, close range, strafing runs against ground targets while under fire from multiple helicopters. It was a tactic that required perfect timing, absolute spatial awareness, and a willingness to fly closer to the ground than any rational person would consider safe. Her first strafing run destroyed 2 more vehicles and damaged a third. Her cannon, rounds punching through armor plating with devastating effect. But the Apache helicopters were learning her patterns, predicting her approach vectors and positioning themselves to catch her in crossfires that grew deadlier with each pass. On her second run, cannon fire from 3 different helicopters bracketed her aircraft so closely that she could feel the shock waves through the airframe. Warning lights began illuminating across her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, engine temperature climbing, fuel flow irregularities that suggested damage to her aircraft's circulatory systems. But she'd accomplished something important. The convoy had stopped moving, its commanders apparently deciding that the immediate threat from air attack outweighed their timeline for reaching Massacre Valley. Every minute she kept them pinned down was another minute for ground forces to reach defensive positions around the refugee camps. Overwatch Viper 1. Convoy has halted advance. Mission partially successful, but I'm running out of options up here. Viper 1, Overwatch. Be advised we're tracking a new contact approaching from the south. Single aircraft, low altitude. High speed. Lillian checked her radar display, noting the new contact that Chin had identified. The electronic signature didn't match any aircraft in her threat library, which meant either her systems were malfunctioning or someone was flying something she'd never encountered before. Overwatch, can you identify the new contact? Negative. Viper 1. Unknown configuration, but it's definitely hostile. Recommend you engage before it reaches the combat area. Lillian banked toward the approaching aircraft, her damaged F-16, protesting the high G-turn with mechanical groans and hydraulic whines that suggested critical systems were failing. Whatever was approaching, she'd have to deal with it quickly. Before her aircraft became UNFLYABL at 10 miles, her targeting computer finally identified the new contact, and Lillian felt her blood freeze in her veins. It was a Su-35 Flanker E, one of Russia's most advanced air superiority fighters. Flown by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. She was out of missiles, low on cannon ammunition, flying a damaged aircraft against an enemy pilot. In a fighter that outclassed her F-16 in every measurable category. The Su-35 was faster, more maneuverable, and armed with weapon systems that could engage her from distances where she couldn't effectively respond. For the first time since beginning her attack run, Admiral Lillian Foster found herself facing a tactical situation where survival seemed genuinely impossible, but impossible had never stopped her before. The Su-35 pilot's voice came across the international emergency frequency, speaking English with a slight Russian accent that carried undertones of private school education and military academy training. American pilot, you are operating in restricted airspace. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Lillian studied her heads-up display, noting the flanker's approach vector and speed. The pilot was confident, maintaining a direct course. That suggested either supreme arrogance or supreme skill. Given the aircraft he was flying and the precision of his formation flying, she suspected the latter. Unknown aircraft, this is Admiral Foster, United States Navy. You are supporting an illegal chemical weapons attack against civilian populations. Break off your approach and surrender, or I will engage. A sound that might have been laughter came through her headphones. Admiral Foster, your reputation precedes you. I am Colonel Viktor Petrov, formerly of the Russian Air Force, currently employed by those who pay considerably better than the Kremlin. The name meant nothing to Lillian, but the casual professionalism in Petrov's voice suggested extensive combat experience. Mercenary pilots with Su-35 fighters didn't appear overnight. They were the products of decades of training and millions of dollars in equipment investment. Someone with serious resources was backing the KLA operation. Colonel Petrov, you have 30 seconds to withdraw before I open fire. Admiral, I appreciate your dedication, but you are flying a damaged F-16 with no missiles against a fully armed Su-35. The mathematics are not in your favor. Lillian's targeting computer confirmed what Petrov had said, her remaining cannon. Ammunition would be effective only at ranges where the flanker's superior weapons systems could destroy her aircraft before she could achieve a firing solution. In a traditional engagement, she had no chance of survival, much less victory, but Lillian Foster had built her career on redefining what traditional engagement meant. Overwatch Viper 1, beginning engagement with unknown fighter aircraft. Continue. Monitoring convoy position. Viper 1, Overwatch. Admiral, that Su-35 outclasses your aircraft in every category. Recommend you maintain distance and wait for support. Overwatch, civilians in Massacre Valley don't have 45 minutes. Engaging. Now. Lillian advanced her throttles to full military power and began a head-on approach toward the Su-35, a tactic so aggressive that it bordered on insanity. Head-on engagements between fighter aircraft typically lasted less than 10 seconds and resulted in mutual destruction more often than clear victory for either side. But Petrov was expecting her to use standard air-to-air tactics, defensive maneuvering, attempts to gain positional advantage, gradual escalation of engagement range. He wasn't expecting her to try to ram him at 5-mile separation. Petrov's threat receivers began screaming warnings about the F-16's approach. Lillian could almost feel his confusion through the radio silence as he tried to understand what she was attempting. His training would be telling him to maintain separation and use his superior missiles to engage at maximum range. But her approach vector made such tactics impossible without risking collision. At 3 miles, Petrov finally broke, pulling the Su-35 into a vertical climb that would allow him to reset the engagement geometry. It was exactly what Lillian had been counting on. She continued her dive toward the convoy, using Petrov's evasive maneuvers to create separation between her aircraft and his weapons systems. "Clever, Admiral," Petrov's voice carried grudging respect, "but you have only delayed the inevitable." Lillian didn't respond. She was too busy lining up her first strafing run against the convoy, her cannon targeting system painting solutions on vehicles that were desperately trying to disperse across the desert floor. Her first burst destroyed a fuel truck, the explosion illuminating the entire convoy in brilliant orange light. Her second burst damaged 2 more vehicles and forced the remainder to seek whatever cover the sparse desert terrain could provide. Behind her, the Su-35 was completing its climb and beginning to turn back toward the engagement. Petrov had altitude and energy advantage now, positioning his aircraft for a missile shot that would end the fight decisively. But he'd also made a critical error. He'd assumed that Lillian's primary objective was air-to-air combat. That it wasn't. Her mission was destroying the convoy, and every second Petrov spent maneuvering for the perfect shot was another second she had to accomplish that goal. Her third strafing run targeted what appeared to be the convoy's command element, a cluster of vehicles surrounded by communications equipment and personnel who were clearly coordinating the defensive response. Her cannon rounds sparked off armor plating and detonated fuel and ammunition stores, creating a chain reaction of explosions that lit up the desert floor like a deadly fireworks display. "Admiral, you are quite good," Petrov said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "But this ends now." Lillian's radar warning receiver erupted with tone indicating that Petrov had achieved missile lock with what her computer identified as an R-77 Adder, Russia's most advanced air-to-air missile. The weapon was faster and more maneuverable than anything in the American inventory, with a guidance system that was nearly impossible to deceive with countermeasures. She had perhaps 10 seconds before impact. Instead of attempting to evade, a futile gesture given the missile's capabilities, Lillian did something that violated every principle of air-to-air combat doctrine. She turned directly toward the approaching Su-35 and advanced her throttles to full afterburner, accelerating to nearly 700 miles per hour in a head-on approach that would bring both aircraft into collision course. "Admiral, what are you doing?" Petrov's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty she'd heard. Lillian didn't answer. She was too busy calculating intercept angles and timing sequences for what she privately thought of as the stupidest tactical maneuver in the history of aviation. But stupidity and courage were often separated only by the outcome, and she intended to make sure the outcome justified the risk. At 2 miles separation, traveling at a combined closure rate of over 1,000 miles per hour, Lillian fired her remaining ammunition in a continuous burst that filled the air between the 2 aircraft with armor-piercing projectiles. She wasn't trying to hit the Su-35 directly at these speeds and distances. Precision targeting was impossible. She was trying to create a wall of metal that Petrov would have to fly through. The Russian pilot's options were suddenly reduced to 3: maintain course and fly through the cannon fire, break left into the mountains where his aircraft's superior maneuverability would be negated by terrain constraints, or break right toward the open desert where his speed advantage could be employed most effectively. Petrov chose the desert option, exactly as Lillian had predicted. The Su-35 banked hard right, its pilot dispensing flares as he attempted to break missile lock and reset the engagement geometry. But his evasive maneuvers brought him directly over the convoy, where the surviving Apache helicopters were still trying to coordinate their own attack against Lillian's F-16. The result was a 3-way engagement at close range, with multiple aircraft maneuvering in the same airspace while trying to avoid hitting their own forces on the ground. It was the kind of tactical chaos that favored the pilot with the most experience in knife fight combat situations, and Lillian Foster had been fighting knife fights since before some of these pilots had learned to fly. She rolled her F-16 inverted and dove toward the largest cluster of ground vehicles, her cannon spitting its remaining ammunition into fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and command vehicles with devastating precision. Behind her, she could hear Petrov cursing in Russian as he tried to achieve a firing solution without hitting the Apache helicopters that were now scattered throughout the combat area. Her fuel gauge showed 20 minutes of flight time remaining. Enough to reach Fob Dagger if she departed immediately, but not enough to continue the engagement much longer. The convoy below was burning in a dozen places, but at least 30 vehicles remained operational, including several that appeared to be carrying the chemical weapons containers that had started this entire engagement. Lillian made a decision that would have horrified her flight instructors and impressed her enemies. She pointed the F-16's nose toward the ground and began a diving attack that would bring her within 50 feet of the desert floor, using the convoy's own vehicles as cover against the helicopters trying to shoot her down. "Admiral, you magnificent crazy woman." Petrov's voice carried something that sounded like genuine respect. "I salute your courage, even as I prepare to kill you." "Colonel, you're welcome to try," Lillian replied, pulling out of her dive so close to a burning tank that she could feel its heat through her aircraft skin. "But I should mention that you just flew into range of something you might not have considered. And what would that be?" Lillian smiled grimly as her radar warning receiver detected the electronic signature she'd been hoping for. "That would be the surface-to-air missile battery that 3rd Battalion deployed to this exact location 6 hours ago. The SAM site had been emplaced as part of a training exercise, its operators running through engagement procedures against hypothetical aerial threats. But the missiles were real, the radar was functional, and the crew was trained to engage any aircraft operating in their airspace without proper identification codes. Petrov's Su-35 had been flying without transponders, maintaining electronic silence to avoid detection. To the SAM battery's targeting computers, he appeared as an unidentified hostile aircraft operating in restricted airspace. The surface-to-air missile that rose from the desert floor moved faster than human reflexes could follow, its guidance system painting Petrov's aircraft with radar energy that his defensive systems couldn't counter. The Russian pilot had perhaps 3 seconds to recognize the threat before the missile impacted his aircraft's right engine, sending the Su-35 tumbling toward the earth in a ball of twisted metal and burning jet fuel. Lillian watched Petrov's ejection seat fire, the pilot separating from his destroyed aircraft with mere seconds to spare before ground impact. His parachute deployed properly, carrying him toward a landing site several miles from the convoy's position. With the Su-35 eliminated, the remaining Apache helicopters found themselves facing a damaged but still dangerous F-16 and the prospect of additional SAM launches if they remained in the area. Their commanders apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The helicopters began withdrawing toward the east, abandoning the convoy to its fate. But Lillian's aircraft was running on fumes, her cannon was empty, and 30 vehicles remained operational on the ground below. She'd bought time for the civilians in Masar Valley, but she hadn't eliminated the threat completely. That's when her radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Viper 1, this is Phoenix 2. Sorry we're late to the party." Lillian looked up to see 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons approaching from the northwest, their weapons pylons loaded with enough ordnance to finish what she'd started. Behind them, the distinctive profiles of a 10 Thunderbolt II attack aircraft were visible against the afternoon sky, their pilots undoubtedly eager to demonstrate why the A-10 was known as the premier tank-killing aircraft in the world. Phoenix 2, Viper 1, targets of opportunity throughout the area. Recommend you engage remaining vehicles while I provide overwatch. Copy, Viper 1. We'll clean up this mess. As the reinforcement aircraft began their attack runs against the scattered convoy, Lillian climbed to a safe altitude and took stock of her situation. Her aircraft was damaged but flyable, Her primary mission was accomplished, and the immediate threat to Masar Valley had been neutralized. But Colonel Petrov's presence suggested that this operation was part of something larger, more complex than a simple insurgent attack. Professional mercenary pilots flying advanced Russian fighters didn't appear randomly in regional conflicts. They were symptoms of superpower involvement, proxy warfare, and the kind of international complications that could escalate into global confrontations. As she set course for Fobe Dagger, Lillian found herself wondering what other surprises were waiting in the shadows of this seemingly straightforward humanitarian crisis. The debriefing room at Fobe Dagger felt smaller than usual. Its walls seemed to press inward as Admiral Lillian Foster faced a tribunal that included General Kane, 2 representatives from CENTCOM, and a woman in civilian clothes whose credentials identified her as Deputy Director Sarah Martinez of the Central Intelligence Agency. Lillian's flight suit still smelled of cordite and jet fuel, and her hands bore the slight tremor that came after extended periods of high-G maneuvering. The medical staff had cleared her for duty after a cursory examination, but she could feel the physical toll of the engagement in every muscle fiber. Her damaged F-16 was currently surrounded by maintenance crews trying to determine how an aircraft with 17 separate impact sites had managed to remain airworthy. Admiral Foster, General Kane began, his right wrist encased in a medical cast that served as a visible reminder of their earlier disagreement. Your actions today prevented what appears to have been a significant chemical weapons attack. However, your decision to engage without proper authorization represents a serious breach of protocol. Kane's tone was carefully neutral, but Lillian could read the conflict in his expression. He was duty-bound to address her violation of orders, but he was also aware that her actions had likely saved thousands of lives. The mathematics of military justice were rarely simple when tactical success conflicted with procedural compliance. Deputy Director Martinez leaned forward, her gray eyes studying Lillian with the kind of intensity that suggested experience in reading people under stress. Admiral, we've reviewed the communications intercepts from the convoy. You were correct about the chemical weapons, specifically a modified variant of VX nerve agent that our laboratories haven't seen before. Modified how? Lillian asked. Enhanced persistence and environmental stability, Martinez replied. Standard VX breaks down relatively quickly when exposed to heat and UV radiation. This variant maintains lethality for extended periods, even in desert conditions. The implications for area denial and long-term contamination are significant. Lillian felt ice forming in her stomach. Enhanced persistence meant that the weapon wasn't just designed to kill people in the immediate target area. It was designed to make territory uninhabitable for months or years afterward, creating permanent exclusion zones that would force massive population displacement. How did the KLA acquire that kind of technology? She asked. Martinez and the CENTCOM representatives exchanged glances that suggested classified information was about to be shared. Admiral, the KLA didn't develop this capability independently. We believe they're receiving support from a consortium of international actors with interests in regional destabilization. Russians, among others. But the situation is more complex than simple state sponsorship. Martinez opened a classified briefing folder, revealing satellite photographs and technical diagrams that painted a disturbing picture of the regional security environment. Admiral, what I'm about to share is classified at the highest levels. This information does not leave this room. Lillian nodded her understanding, recognizing the formal language that preceded intelligence revelations with significant national security implications. 3 months ago, our assets identified a private military corporation called Apex Strategic Solutions operating in the region. On the surface, they're a legitimate security consulting firm providing protective services to international corporations involved in resource extraction. In reality, they're a front organization for weapons development and testing. Martinez placed several photographs on the briefing table, showing advanced aircraft, modified weapon systems, and training facilities. That looked more like military bases than corporate installations. Colonel Petrov, the Su-35 pilot you encountered today, is Apex's chief flight instructor. He's been training pilots from various insurgent groups in advanced tactical procedures. Training them for what purpose? Lillian asked, though she suspected. She already knew the answer. To conduct proof-of-concept operations for weapon systems that major powers want to test without direct involvement, replied Colonel James Harrison, the senior CENTCOM representative. Harrison had been monitoring international weapons development programs for over a decade and had watched the gradual privatization of warfare with growing concern. Admiral, today's attack wasn't just about Masar Valley. It was a field test for tactics and weapons that could be employed in conflicts worldwide. The implications were staggering. If Apex Strategic Solutions was providing training and equipment to insurgent groups across multiple theaters, they represented a fundamental threat to regional stability everywhere American forces were deployed. More importantly, the chemical weapons variant suggested access to research and development capabilities that few organizations possessed. Who's backing Apex? Lillian asked. That's where the situation becomes complicated, Martinez said. Financial analysis suggests funding from sources in Russia, China, Iran, and several private corporations with interests in defense contracting. It's a truly international consortium united by shared interests in undermining American influence. In resource-rich regions, General Kane shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his cast clicking against the briefing table. Admiral Foster, given this intelligence, your engagement today was even more significant than we initially realized. You didn't just prevent a chemical attack. You disrupted a major test of next-generation asymmetric warfare capabilities. But Lillian could hear the unspoken continuation in Kane's voice. But your success has almost certainly triggered responses that we're not prepared to handle, Colonel Harrison said. Apex has invested significant resources in this operation. They won't simply abandon their objectives because one convoy was destroyed. Martinez nodded grimly. Admiral, we're tracking movement from at least 3 additional Apex facilities in the region. Aircraft, ground vehicles, and personnel that suggest they're preparing a much larger operation. Timeline? Unknown. But given their demonstrated capabilities and the resources they've already committed, we're estimating 48 to 72 hours before they can mount a coordinated response. Lillian studied the intelligence materials, her tactical mind automatically beginning to formulate defensive strategies. What are our options for preemptive action? Limited, Harrison replied. Apex facilities are located in 3 different countries, 2 of which don't permit American military operations on their territory. And several of their installations are co-located with legitimate civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, refugee camps. Any direct action would result in significant civilian casualties. So we're reactive rather than proactive, Lillian said. For now, yes. But Admiral, there is one tactical advantage we've gained from today's engagement. Martinez smiled with the expression of someone about to reveal a particularly valuable piece of intelligence. Colonel Petrov survived his ejection and was captured by 3rd Battalion Ground Forces approximately 30 minutes ago. He's being transported to our detention facility for interrogation. Lillian raised an eyebrow. Professional military pilots, especially those operating in mercenary capacities, typically underwent extensive resistance to interrogation training. Breaking someone with Petrov's background would require sophisticated techniques and considerable time. What's the likelihood of extracting useful intelligence? Higher than you might expect, Martinez replied. Colonel Petrov's personnel file suggests someone with strong personal ethics who became involved with Apex for financial rather than ideological reasons. He lost family members during the economic collapse following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and apparently needed income to support extended family members. You're suggesting he might be willing to cooperate. I'm suggesting he might be willing to limit the scope of future civilian casualties if presented with appropriate incentives, Martinez said. Admiral, would you be willing to participate in the interrogation process? Your engagement with him today demonstrated capabilities that clearly impressed him. Professional respect might open doors that traditional interrogation techniques cannot. Lillian considered the request. Interrogating captured enemy personnel wasn't typically within her areas of responsibility, but the unusual circumstances of Petrov's capture and the international implications of the Apex operation made this a special case. If she could convince him to provide intelligence about future attacks, it might prevent the kind of escalation that could destabilize the entire region. When do you want to begin? Immediately. Colonel Petrov is being held in detention facility Delta, approximately 20 minutes by ground transport. We've arranged for a Russian-speaking interrogator to assist, but your presence as the pilot who defeated him in combat might provide psychological leverage we can't achieve through other means. Kane cleared his throat. Admiral, before you commit to additional operations, we need to address the question of your aircraft. The damage assessment indicates that your F-16 will require extensive repairs before it's mission capable again. Lillian had expected this issue to arise. Combat damage to fighter aircraft was rarely cosmetic, and her aircraft had absorbed enough punishment to ground most planes permanently. What's the timeline for repairs? Minimum 72 hours, possibly longer depending on parts availability. Kane replied, But Admiral, we have other aircraft available. The F-35 will be operational by tomorrow morning, and we're expecting delivery of 2 additional F-16s by the end of the week. The F-35's stealth capabilities would be useful for reconnaissance missions, Lillian mused. And if Apex is planning coordinated attacks, we'll need intelligence on their staging areas and operational timelines. Martinez stood, indicating that the briefing was concluding. Admiral, the interrogation facility is expecting you within the hour. Colonel Petrov has requested medical attention for injuries sustained during his ejection, but he's also specifically asked to speak with the pilot who engaged him in combat. He asked for me by name, by rank and aircraft type. Apparently, your tactical approach made quite an impression. As the briefing participants began gathering their materials, Lillian found herself wondering what kind of man chose to fly combat missions for money rather than country. Petrov's voice during their engagement had carried the professionalism of someone trained in legitimate military institutions, but his willingness to support chemical weapons attacks suggested moral flexibility that she found difficult to understand. Transport to detention facility, Delta took her through parts of Fabi Dagger that she rarely visited, the logistics areas where supply convoys were processed, the medical facilities where wounded personnel received treatment, and the administrative buildings where the complex paperwork of modern military operations was managed by personnel who never saw combat but whose contributions were essential to mission success. Detention Facility Delta occupied a fortified compound on the southeastern edge of FOB Dagger. Its concrete walls and guard towers, a stark reminder that not all aspects of military operations were conducted in the open desert. Air that Lillian preferred. The facility housed captured insurgents, suspected weapons smugglers, and occasionally, as in today's case, professional military personnel whose allegiances had shifted from national service to private profit. Colonel Viktor Petrov sat in interview room 3, his left arm in a medical sling and his flight suit replaced with standard detainee clothing. Despite his circumstances, he maintained the bearing of a career military officer, straight posture, alert eyes, and the kind of situational awareness that suggested he was continuously evaluating his environment for tactical advantages When Lillian entered the room, accompanied by CIA interrogator Dr. Elena Vasquez, Petrov's expression shifted to one of genuine interest. He studied Lillian's face with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile the pilot, who had outmaneuvered him in aerial combat, with the woman, now sitting across a metal table in a sterile interrogation facility. "Admiral Foster," he said in accented but precise English, "it is an honor to meet you in person. Your tactics today were unconventional." "Colonel Petrov," Lillian replied, settling into her chair with the casual confidence of someone comfortable in hostile environments. "Your employers were planning to murder 50,000 civilians with chemical weapons. Unconventional seemed appropriate." Petrov's expression darkened. "Admiral, I flew escort missions for what I was told were legitimate military supplies being transported to government forces. I was not informed about chemical weapons." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her psychological training evident in the way she modulated her voice to project both authority and empathy. "Colonel, we've analyzed the convoy's cargo manifests. The shipping containers were specifically designed for transporting volatile chemical compounds. The documentation was in Russian and Arabic, languages you speak fluently." "I do not inspect every piece of cargo personally," Petrov replied, but his tone carried less conviction than his words suggested. Lillian studied the Russian pilot's face, noting micro-expressions that suggested internal conflict. Her training in reading people under stress, a skill essential for formation flying and combat leadership, told her that Petrov was struggling with information that challenged his understanding of the mission he'd been assigned. "Colonel," she said quietly, "tell me about Apex Strategic Solutions. What did they promise you when you accepted employment?" Petrov was silent for nearly a minute, his eyes focused on some invisible point beyond the room's walls. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone acknowledging uncomfortable truths about choices he'd made. "My daughter requires medical treatment that the Russian healthcare system cannot provide. Specialized surgery, experimental medications, rehabilitation services that cost more money than a military pension can support." He met Lillian's gaze directly. "Apex offered me enough income to save her life. The moral calculus seemed simple at the time, and now I discover that my employment may have contributed to the deaths of thousands of innocent people. The moral calculus has become considerably more complex." Dr. Vasquez opened a classified folder and placed several photographs on the table. Satellite images of Apex facilities, organizational charts showing command structures, and financial documents detailing weapons purchases and personnel contracts. "Colonel, we need your help to prevent future attacks. What can you tell us about Apex's operational capabilities and immediate plans?" Petrov studied the photographs with professional interest, occasionally nodding as he recognized locations or personnel. "Apex operates 4 primary facilities in the region, with secondary support bases in countries that do not permit American military presence. Their total aircraft inventory includes 12 fixed-wing fighters, 37 helicopters, and specialized transport aircraft for moving sensitive materials." "Personnel strength?" Lillian asked. "Approximately 400 combat personnel, including pilots, ground crews, security specialists, and technical support staff. Most are former military from various countries: Russia, Ukraine, Serbia, Syria, Iraq. Professional soldiers seeking higher compensation than their national militaries could provide." The numbers were sobering. Apex represented a formidable military force operating outside traditional command structures or international oversight. More troubling was their demonstrated willingness to support operations targeting civilian populations. "Colonel," Dr. Vasquez said, "what can you tell us about planned future operations?" Petrov hesitated, his internal conflict evident in the tension around his eyes. "There is a 72-hour operational cycle beginning tomorrow at dawn. 3 separate target areas, coordinated attacks designed to demonstrate the effectiveness of new tactical approaches, chemical weapons, among other innovations. Admiral Foster, the attack you disrupted today was intended as proof of concept for area denial tactics. The enhanced VX variant was designed to create exclusion zones that would force population displacement on a massive scale. Lillian felt her blood pressure climbing as the full scope of Apex's objectives became clear. Ethnic cleansing through chemical contamination. Precisely. But Admiral, today's failure will force them to accelerate their timeline and increase the scope of operations. They cannot afford to appear ineffective to their financial backers. Dr. Vasquez placed additional documents on the table: communications intercepts, financial transfers, and technical specifications for weapon systems that Lillian didn't recognize. Colonel, these are the materials we've gathered about Apex's capabilities. What can you tell us about their advanced weapons programs? Petrov examined the documents with growing alarm, his expression shifting from cooperation to genuine concern. These specifications. Admiral, this represents technology I was not aware of. Advanced guidance systems, enhanced chemical formulations, delivery mechanisms designed for maximum area coverage with minimal detection signatures. How advanced? Lillian asked. Beyond anything I encountered during my service with the Russian Air Force. This suggests research and development capabilities that exceed most national militaries. Petrov looked up from the documents, his face pale. Admiral, if these specifications are accurate, Apex possesses weapon systems that could destabilize entire regions. Dr. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. Colonel, we need specific intelligence about their operational plans. Target locations, timing, personnel assignments, logistical requirements. Without detailed information, we cannot prevent the attacks. Petrov was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the implications of full cooperation. Finally, he spoke with the tone of someone making an irreversible decision. There is a secure communications facility at grid reference 347 to 892. All operational planning is coordinated through that location. If you could access their servers, we'd need someone with detailed knowledge of their security procedures and access codes, Lillian said. Yes, someone like me. The statement hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Dr. Vasquez and Lillian exchanged glances that conveyed the same thought. Using Petrov to penetrate Apex, security would be extraordinarily dangerous for everyone involved, but it might represent their only opportunity to prevent catastrophic civilian casualties. Colonel, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, are you suggesting cooperative intelligence gathering? I am suggesting that my daughter's medical treatment is meaningless if I contribute to genocide, Petrov replied. Admiral Foster, your actions today demonstrated that individual conscience can prevail over organizational momentum. Perhaps it is time for me to make a similar demonstration. 6 hours later, Lillian found herself in the cockpit of an F-35A. Lightning II, the aircraft's stealth capabilities essential for the mission she was about to undertake. The Lightning's advanced avionics and reduced radar signature would allow her to operate in contested airspace with minimal risk of detection. But the mission's success would depend on factors beyond technological superiority. Colonel Petrov sat in the passenger compartment of a modified C-130 transport aircraft, accompanied by a team of special operations personnel, whose job was to ensure he maintained his cooperation once they reached the target area. The Russian pilot had provided detailed intelligence about Apex security procedures, guard rotations, and computer access protocols, but his true loyalty remained an open question. Viper 1, this is Overwatch, came Chun's voice through the encrypted communications channel. Target facility is showing normal activity patterns. No indication they're aware of pending operations. Copy Overwatch. beginning approach to target area. The Apex Communications Facility occupied a compound built into the side of a mountain valley, approximately 60 miles southeast of Phobe Dagger. Satellite imagery showed modern buildings disguised as civilian telecommunications infrastructure. But the defensive positions and restricted access roads revealed its true military purpose. Lillian's mission was to provide air cover for the Special Operations Team while they penetrated the facility's security perimeter and accessed the computer systems that contained Apex's operational plans. It was the kind of mission that required precise coordination between multiple elements operating in an environment where a single mistake could result in catastrophic failure. At 20,000 feet, the F-35 sensors began painting a detailed picture of the target area. Lillian could see vehicle movement, personnel positions, and defensive installations that suggested Apex was considerably more prepared for attack than intelligence estimates had indicated. Overwatch Viper 1. Count 15 vehicles in the compound. Multiple personnel concentrations around defensive positions. This doesn't look like normal activity patterns. Viper 1. Overwatch. Confirmed. Intelligence suggests they may be expecting some form of response to today's convoy engagement. Lillian cursed under her breath. If Apex was prepared for attack, the Special Operations Team would be walking into a carefully prepared ambush. But the mission timeline didn't allow for postponement. Apex's accelerated operational schedule meant that waiting would only make future targets more vulnerable. Overwatch, what's the status of our ground element? Ground element is 30 minutes from target. Colonel Petrov confirms that his access codes should remain valid for another 6 hours. Should remain valid? Ground element leader expresses concerns about our Russian friends' ultimate loyalties. Lillian could understand those concerns. Using enemy personnel for intelligence gathering was always a calculated risk, complicated by the possibility that their cooperation was itself part of a more complex deception operation. But time constraints and tactical necessity had forced them to accept risks that careful planning would normally minimize. Her radar warning receiver detected multiple aircraft signatures approaching from the north, 4 helicopters flying in formation toward the target area. Lillian's targeting computer identified them as Mi-17 HIP transport helicopters, probably carrying reinforcements to strengthen the facility's defensive capability. Overwatch Viper 1. 4 bandits approaching target from the north. Recommend we intercept before they reach the facility. Viper 1. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Minimize noise signature if possible. The F-35's advanced weapon systems included AM-12 OMRAAM missiles optimized for stealth operations, reduced exhaust signatures, and modified guidance systems that minimize the electronic footprint associated with missile launch. Lillian armed 2 missiles and began her approach toward the helicopter formation. At 12 miles, she achieved lock on the lead Mi-17 and fired her first AMRAAM. The missile separated from its internal bay with minimal visual signature. Its guidance system immediately painting the target helicopter with radar energy that the aircraft's defensive systems couldn't detect until it was too late to respond. The explosion lit up the mountain valley like a brief sunrise, the Mi-17 disintegrating in a ball of orange flame and twisted metal that sent debris cascading across the rocky terrain below. The remaining 3 helicopters immediately scattered, their pilots broadcasting warnings in multiple languages as they sought to identify the source of the attack. Lillian's second missile found its target 8 seconds later, striking another Mi-17 in the engine compartment and sending it spinning toward the ground in an uncontrolled autorotation. The surviving helicopters were now maneuvering defensively, but their thermal signatures made them easy targets for the F-35's advanced tracking systems. Viper 1. Overwatch. Excellent shooting. Ground element is proceeding to target. But Lillian's attack had achieved more than tactical success. It had revealed the true scope of Apex's defensive preparations. As the surviving helicopters began broadcasting distress signals, additional aircraft signatures appeared on her radar display. 6 more helicopters, 2 fixed-wing aircraft, and multiple ground-based air defense systems that began actively scanning for targets. Overwatch, this facility is much more heavily defended than intelligence indicated. I count multiple SAM sites, additional aircraft, and electronic warfare systems that suggest a major command facility rather than simple communication center. Viper 1, Overwatch. Ground element is committed to the mission. Can you provide suppression of enemy air defenses? Lillian studied her tactical display, calculating engagement ranges and ammunition requirements for neutralizing the threats. She'd identified the mission was rapidly evolving from covert intelligence gathering to full-scale combat operation, with escalation potential that could trigger regional conflict, but 50,000 civilians in the Saar Valley were still at risk. And intelligence indicated that additional target areas contain civilian populations in the hundreds of thousands. The mathematics of moral responsibility demanded that she accept tactical risks to prevent strategic catastrophe. Overwatch beginning seed operations. Recommend you advise higher headquarters that this mission is now classified as direct action, rather than reconnaissance. Lillian selected her first target, a SA-11 surface-to-air missile battery positioned on the ridge overlooking the compound. The SAM system was sophisticated enough to threaten her aircraft if she remained in the area, but its radar signature also made it vulnerable to the F-35's anti-radiation missiles. Her GM-88 HARM missile locked onto the SAM battery's tracking radar and streaked toward its target at 3 times the speed of sound. The explosion destroyed not just the missile launcher, but the entire fire control system, eliminating the site's ability to engage aerial targets. But her attack had revealed her approximate position to the remaining air defense systems, and Lillian found herself facing the kind of coordinated response that suggested extensive training and professional leadership. Multiple SAM sites began active tracking, while the surviving aircraft converged on her position with tactical discipline that impressed her even as she prepared to engage them. Ground element, Viper 1. You have approximately 10 minutes before this area becomes untenable for air support. Viper 1, ground element. We're inside the perimeter. Colonel Petrov's access codes worked, and we're proceeding to the computer facility. At least the mission was progressing. Lillian armed her remaining missiles and began engaging the aircraft that posed the greatest threat to her continued survival. Her next AMRAAM destroyed a Hind gunship that was attempting to position itself for a missile shot, and her subsequent engagement eliminated a second helicopter that had been trying to coordinate with ground-based fire control systems, but ammunition was finite, and Apex seemed to have unlimited aircraft to throw into the engagement. More concerning were the electronic warfare systems that were beginning to interfere with her targeting computers and communications equipment. Someone on the ground was employing sophisticated countermeasures designed specifically to degrade the F-35's advanced capabilities. Viper 1, ground element. We've accessed the computer systems. Intelligence download in progress, but we're detecting security alerts throughout the facility. Estimate 5 minutes before we need extraction. Ground element, Viper 1, beginning extraction support operations. Lillian dove toward the compound itself, her 25mm cannon targeting defensive positions and vehicles that represented threats to the Special Operations Team. Her strafing runs were precise and devastating, eliminating guard posts and communication facilities that were essential to coordinated defense. But her low-altitude operations brought her within range of small arms, fire and portable air defense systems that posed serious threats to her aircraft. Warning lights began illuminating across her instrument panel as cannon rounds and missile fragments impacted her fuselage and wings. Viper 1, ground element. Intelligence download complete. We have everything, but Colonel Petrov is missing. The announcement hit Lillian like a physical blow. If Petrov had betrayed them, the entire mission could be compromised, along with the lives of the special operations personnel who had trusted his intelligence. But if he was genuinely cooperating and had been captured or killed, they were losing a valuable source of information about Apex capabilities. Ground element, what's Petrov's last known position? Unknown, Viper 1. He separated from the team during building entry, claiming he needed to disable security systems. We haven't had contact for 7 minutes. Lillian's tactical mind immediately began calculating possibilities. Petrov could be attempting to sabotage the mission from within, providing Apex with real-time intelligence about American capabilities and intentions. Alternatively, he might be pursuing his own objectives within the facility, using the mission as cover for personal revenge against employers who had deceived him about their true activities. Ground element, Viper 1, recommend immediate extraction. This area is becoming untenable. Viper 1, ground element. We have one more building to search. Give us 3 minutes. 3 minutes was approximately 2.5 minutes longer than Lillian estimated her aircraft could survive in the current tactical environment. The combination of surface-to-air threats, aggressive fighter aircraft, and concentrated small arms fire was creating an engagement envelope that exceeded even the F-35's considerable defensive capabilities. But the intelligence they'd gathered could prevent chemical weapons attacks against hundreds of thousands of civilians. 3 minutes of additional risk seemed acceptable when weighed against those potential consequences. Lillian armed her last 2 missiles and began what she privately thought of as her final engagement of the day. The tactics she employed violated every principle of aircraft survivability, bringing her F-35 to altitudes and airspeeds that made her vulnerable to threats she would normally avoid entirely. But her aggressive approach achieved surprise, allowing her to destroy 2 more helicopters and damage a third before the remaining aircraft could coordinate effective countermeasures. More importantly, her attacks were forcing Apex personnel to focus on immediate threats rather than searching for infiltrating ground forces. Ground element, Viper 1. You have 90 seconds before I run out of options up here. Viper 1, ground element. We found him. Status? Colonel Petrov is KIA. Appears he was attempting to access additional computer systems when facility security responded. But he left us a gift, a complete listing of Apex operational plans for the next 72 hours. Lillian felt an unexpected pang of loss for the Russian pilot who had ultimately chosen conscience over profit. Petrov's final action suggested that their earlier conversation had crystallized his understanding of the moral implications of his employment with Apex. Ground element, time to go. Extraction route Alpha is compromised. Recommend route Charlie. Viper 1, ground element. Proceeding to extraction point Charlie. Thank you for the cover. As the special operations team began their withdrawal from the compound, Lillian climbed a higher altitude and set course for Phobe Dagger. Her aircraft was damaged but still flyable. Her mission was successful, and the intelligence they'd gathered would enable preventive action against Apex's planned attacks. But the facility below was still operational. Its personnel were now fully aware of American capabilities, and the broader network of Apex installations remained intact. Today's success was tactical rather than strategic, buying time rather than eliminating threats. 18 hours later, Admiral Lillian Foster stood before a joint operational planning session that included representatives from 3 different military services, 4 intelligence agencies, and the National Security Council. The intelligence gathered from the Apex facility had revealed the scope and timing of planned attacks that threatened to destabilize the entire region. Ladies and gentlemen, began General Patricia Morrison, CENTCOM commander, the intelligence we've obtained indicates coordinated attacks against 7 different target areas, with combined civilian populations exceeding 2 million people. The attacks are scheduled to begin in less than 36 hours. The briefing room fell silent as the participants absorbed the magnitude of the threat they were facing. 2 million civilians represented more people than lived in many American cities, and the enhanced chemical weapons that Apex planned to employ would create casualty rates that exceeded anything seen since World War II. Deputy Director Martinez stood and activated a wall display showing satellite imagery of the target areas. The attack vectors are designed to maximize civilian casualties while minimizing military response capability. Apex has positioned assets to exploit gaps in regional defense coverage and international response protocols. Admiral Foster studied the display, noting the tactical sophistication of the planned operations. This isn't insurgent activity. This is coordinated warfare conducted by professionals with extensive planning capability and advanced equipment. Agreed, replied Colonel Harrison from CENTCOM Intelligence. Admiral, the aircraft you engaged 2 days ago represent only a fraction of Apex's total capabilities. They have sufficient assets to conduct simultaneous operations across multiple theaters while maintaining strategic reserves for contingency response. The implications were sobering. American forces in the region were substantial, but were configured primarily for counterinsurgency operations rather than conventional warfare. Against a professional military organization with advanced equipment and extensive training. What are our options for preventing these attacks? Asked General Morrison. Martinez consulted her classified briefing materials before responding. Direct action against all 7 Apex facilities simultaneously. It's the only approach that prevents them from redistributing assets or accelerating operational timelines. Force requirements? Morrison asked. Minimum, 4 squadrons of fighter aircraft, 2 special operations battalions, extensive logistics support, and coordination with allied forces in 3 different countries, replied Harrison. But General, several target facilities are located in countries that don't permit American military operations. Morrison nodded grimly. Political constraints versus operational necessity. The eternal challenge of modern warfare. Lillian leaned forward in her chair, her tactical mind working through alternatives that might achieve mission success without triggering international incidents. General, what if we approach this differently? Instead of simultaneous direct action, what about coordinated disruption operations designed to prevent Apex from executing their timeline? Explain. Apex's operations require extensive coordination between multiple facilities. Communications, logistics, personnel transfer, equipment maintenance. All of these represent vulnerabilities we can exploit without necessarily conducting direct attacks against sovereign territory. Martinez's expression showed interest. Admiral, are you suggesting electronic warfare and indirect action rather than kinetic operations? I'm suggesting we use Apex's operational sophistication against them. Complex operations require complex support structures, and complex support structures create multiple failure points. General Morrison studied the tactical displays, her expression thoughtful. Admiral Foster, you're proposing that we disrupt their ability to coordinate rather than destroying their individual capabilities. Exactly. Force them to operate as isolated units rather than coordinated elements. Reduce their effectiveness through systematic degradation of their support infrastructure. The planning session continued for another 2 hours, with various experts contributing analysis of Apex capabilities, international legal constraints, and potential unintended consequences of different operational approaches. But the fundamental challenge remained unchanged, preventing catastrophic civilian casualties, while operating within political and legal frameworks that limited available options. Finally, General Morrison stood and addressed the assembled personnel. Ladies and gentlemen, We have 34 hours to prevent the largest chemical weapons attack in modern history. Admiral Foster's approach offers our best opportunity to achieve mission success while minimizing international complications. She turned to Lillian directly. Admiral, I'm placing you in command of Operation Silent Thunder. Your mission is to disrupt Apex operational capability through whatever means necessary. You will have priority access to all available assets and authorization to coordinate with allied forces as required. Lillian felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders, but this time the stakes were measured. Not in tactical objectives, but in millions of human lives. General, I'll need complete operational flexibility and minimal oversight constraints. You'll have both. Admiral, the success or failure of this operation may determine whether chemical weapons become routine tools of asymmetric warfare. Implications extend far beyond the immediate target areas. As the planning session dispersed, Lillian found herself thinking about Colonel Petrov's final words about moral calculus becoming complex when individual choices affected thousands of innocent people. Her decisions over the next 34 hours would have consequences that rippled outward through time and space, affecting people whose names she would never know in places she might never visit. But that was the burden of command, the price of power, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform of the United States military. Some decisions could only be made by individuals willing to accept the weight of their consequences. Admiral Lillian Foster had been carrying that weight for 17 years. She was prepared to carry it for 34 more hours. The operation began at 03:00 hours with simultaneous electronic warfare attacks against Apex communications networks. Lillian coordinated from the operations center at Phobe Dagger, watching tactical displays that showed friendly forces engaging targets across 7 different countries through methods that ranged from sophisticated cyber attacks to targeted disruption of logistical infrastructure. Admiral, Team Alpha has successfully penetrated Apex's primary communications hub, reported Major Rodriguez, now serving as her operations officer despite his broken wrist. Electronic intelligence indicates increasing confusion among Apex commanders about operational timing and target assignments. The first phase of Silent Thunder was designed to create precisely that confusion, degrading Apex's ability to coordinate complex operations without necessarily destroying their physical capabilities. By attacking their command and control infrastructure, Lillian was forcing them to operate as isolated units rather than integrated elements of a larger tactical plan. Team Beta status? She asked. Beta has eliminated 3 Apex logistics convoys carrying specialized equipment for chemical weapons deployment, replied Lieutenant Commander Chun. No chemical agents were involved, but the specialized handling equipment required for safe transport has been destroyed. Each successful interdiction reduced Apex's operational capability, while increasing their dependence on improvised solutions that introduced additional opportunities for failure. Professional military operations required precise coordination between multiple elements, and Silent Thunder was systematically eliminating the infrastructure that made such coordination possible. Admiral, Chun continued, we're intercepting increased communications traffic between Apex facilities. They're clearly aware that their operations are being compromised, but they don't appear to understand the full scope of what we're doing. That was intentional. By using indirect methods rather than direct attacks, Silent Thunder created the impression of systematic bad luck and equipment failure rather than coordinated enemy action. Apex commanders were responding to individual problems rather than recognizing the overall pattern of disruption. Lillian studied the tactical displays, showing friendly force positions across the operational area. Chun, what's our timeline for degrading their operational capability below mission effective levels? Current assessment suggests 18 to 24 hours, Admiral. But that assumes they don't adapt their tactics or accelerate their operational Timeline. And if they do adapt? Chun's expression was grim. If Apex recognizes what we're doing and shifts to simplified operational procedures, they could still execute attacks against at least 3 of the 7 target areas. 3 target areas meant approximately 600,000 civilian casualties, even with the degraded capability that Silent Thunder was designed to create. The mathematics were still horrific, but they represented a significant improvement over the original threat assessment. Admiral, Rodriguez called from his position at the communications console. Priority message from Team Delta. They've identified an Apex facility that doesn't appear on our target list. Lillian felt ice crystallize in her stomach. Additional facilities meant additional capabilities, additional target areas, and potentially additional weapon systems that intelligence hadn't detected. Details? Grid reference 472 to 853, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of our primary area of operations. Satellite imagery shows specialized equipment consistent with advanced weapons research and development. A research facility meant that Apex's capabilities extended beyond deploying existing weapon systems to developing new ones. More troubling. It suggested that today's planned attacks were part of a larger program designed to test and refine chemical warfare tactics for future operations. Rodriguez, get me everything available on that facility. Personnel, equipment, defensive capability, operational purpose. I want to know what they're doing there and how it affects our mission. As Rodriguez coordinated intelligence gathering efforts, Lillian found herself staring at tactical displays that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. Every problem they solved revealed additional problems. Every threat they neutralized exposed new threats. And every success created new opportunities for failure. The communications console crackled with reports from teams, scattered across thousands of square miles of desert terrain. Team Charlie had successfully destroyed an Apex fuel depot, reducing their aircraft operational radius by approximately 30%. Team Echo had eliminated a convoy carrying specialized communications equipment, further degrading Apex's coordination capability. Team Fox had captured an Apex logistics officer, whose interrogation was providing real-time intelligence about their operational procedures. But surveillance reports also indicated that Apex was adapting to the disruption, implementing emergency procedures and backup systems that suggested extensive contingency planning. Professional military organizations didn't survive in hostile environments without developing resilience against systematic attack. Admiral, Chun said quietly, we're approaching decision point. Current degradation levels suggest we can prevent attacks against 4 of the 7 target areas. But maintaining this operational tempo for another 18 hours will require committing our strategic reserves. The strategic reserves consisted of aircraft, personnel, and equipment that were intended for emergency response to unforeseen complications. Committing them to Silent Thunder would leave American forces in the region without backup capabilities if the operation triggered unexpected responses from Apex or their international sponsors, but leaving 3 target areas vulnerable meant accepting 600,000 civilian casualties as the price of maintaining strategic flexibility. Lillian closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of command responsibility pressing down on her like a physical force. These were the kinds of decisions that ended careers, destroyed sleep, and created nightmares that lasted decades. But they were also the decisions that separated commanders from staff officers, leaders from managers, and professionals from civilians wearing uniforms. Commit the strategic reserves, she said firmly. All target areas, maximum effort, except the risks. Admiral, Rodriguez said from his position at the communications console, Team Golf is reporting contact with that additional facility you wanted investigated. Status? Heavy resistance, Admiral. This isn't just a research facility. It's a command center with significant defensive capability. Team Golf is requesting immediate support. Lillian studied the tactical display, noting the positions of available assets and calculating response times for various support options. The newly discovered facility was beyond the range of most of her available aircraft, but there was one option that might work. "Prep the F-35 for immediate launch," she ordered. "Full air-to-ground configuration, maximum fuel load." "Admiral," Chun said carefully, "you've been operational for over 40 hours with minimal rest. Fatigue degrades decision-making capability and aircraft handling performance." "Chun, if that facility is what I think it is, pilot fatigue is the least of our problems." As ground crews prepared her aircraft, Lillian reviewed intelligence reports from the facility that Team Golf was investigating. The satellite imagery showed underground installations, specialized equipment, and defensive positions that suggested something far more sophisticated than a simple research laboratory. More troubling were the electronic signatures that intelligence had detected: communications equipment capable of coordinating operations across multiple continents, computer systems with processing capability that exceeded most national militaries, and defensive systems that included advanced surface-to-air missiles and electronic warfare capabilities. This wasn't just a regional command center. This was the nerve center for an international organization with global reach and advanced capabilities. "Admiral," Rodriguez called as she prepared to depart for the flight line. "Team Golf is reporting multiple casualties and requesting immediate extraction. Whatever's in that facility, they're willing to fight to protect it." Lillian paused at the door of the operations center, looking back at the tactical displays that showed friendly forces scattered across a combat area larger than some American states. Silent Thunder was succeeding in its immediate objectives, but it was also revealing the true scope of the threat they were facing. Apex Strategic Solutions wasn't just a regional military contractor. It was the operational arm of an international consortium with resources, capabilities, and objectives that challenged American interests worldwide. Today's mission was preventing chemical weapons attacks against civilian populations. Tomorrow's mission might be preventing global conflict between superpowers operating through proxy forces equipped with advanced weapons and trained by professional military personnel. But tomorrow's missions would have to wait. Today's mission required her personal attention and 50 minutes of flight time to reach an objective that might hold the key to understanding who was really behind Apex and what they ultimately hoped to achieve. "Chun, maintain operational coordination while I'm airborne. If this goes badly, Silent Thunder continues under your command." "Admiral, what should I tell General Morrison if she asks about your mission status?" Lillian smiled grimly as she headed toward the flight line where her 35 waited like a predator prepared for the hunt. "Tell her I'm conducting a reconnaissance flight to assess the tactical situation. Some missions required personal leadership, direct action, and the willingness to accept risks that couldn't be delegated to subordinates." Admiral Lillian Foster had built her career on flying those missions. Today would determine whether that career had prepared her for the challenges that lay ahead. 6 months later, Admiral Lillian Foster stood on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, watching F-35 Lightning II fighters conduct carrier qualification operations in the bright Atlantic sunshine. The successful completion of Operation Silent Thunder had prevented the chemical weapons attacks, dismantled the Apex Strategic Solutions Network, and exposed an international conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government in multiple countries, but victory had come at a cost. The final assault on Apex's command facility had required direct action that resulted in significant international diplomatic complications. The exposure of classified capabilities that America had preferred to keep secret, and the revelation that proxy warfare had evolved into something far more sophisticated and dangerous than traditional military doctrine acknowledged. "Admiral," said Captain Sarah Martinez, the carrier's commanding officer, The Secretary of Defense is requesting a secure video conference at 1400 hours. Lillian nodded, noting the formality in Martinez's tone that suggested this wasn't a routine. Operational update. SecDef didn't typically schedule personal conferences with individual admirals, unless there were significant policy implications or career-affecting decisions to be discussed. Any indication of the topic? Negative, Admiral. But the communication is classified at the highest levels and includes participation from multiple agencies. Lillian had been expecting this conversation since her return from the operational area. Operation Silent Thunder had exceeded its tactical objectives, but had also revealed capabilities and threats that required strategic responses at the national level. Her after-action reports had painted a picture of modern warfare that challenged basic assumptions about international conflict and America's ability to respond to non-state actors with advanced military capabilities. The secure conference room aboard the carrier was designed for communications with the highest levels of government, its electronic shielding and encryption systems ensuring that sensitive conversations remained private despite the electromagnetic environment of naval operations. When the video link activated at precisely 1400 hours, Lillian found herself facing Secretary of Defense Patricia Williamson, CIA Director Robert Chun, and Admiral Patricia Blackwood from CENTCOM. Admiral Foster, Secretary Williamson began without preamble. Your operation in the Kalahar Desert has had consequences that extend far beyond the immediate tactical objectives. The international response to American direct action against Apex facilities has been significant. Lillian maintained her professional composure, but she could read the subtext in Williamson's tone. When senior officials started talking about international responses and consequences, it usually meant that successful operations had created political problems for people whose concerns extended beyond military effectiveness. Madam Secretary, what specific concerns are being raised? CIA Director Chun leaned forward, his expression serious. Admiral, the intelligence we gathered from Apex facilities has revealed connections to state-level actors that we weren't previously aware of. The consortium backing Apex includes elements from Russia, China, Iran, and several European countries with complex relationships to American interests. In other words, Admiral Blackwood added, your tactical success has exposed a strategic problem that we're not currently equipped to address through traditional means. Lillian felt the familiar sensation of being briefed on problems that were above her pay grade, but would somehow become her responsibility to solve. What kind of strategic problem? Secretary Williamson activated a classified briefing display showing global military installations, financial networks, and organizational charts that painted a disturbing picture of international coordination. Admiral, Apex was one node in a network of private military organizations operating worldwide. Our analysis suggests coordinated efforts to Secretary Williamson activated a classified briefing display showing global military installations, financial networks, and organizational charts that painted a disturbing picture of international coordination. Admiral, Apex was one node in a network of private military organizations operating worldwide. Our analysis suggests coordinated efforts to destabilize American interests through proxy warfare that operates below the threshold of conventional conflict. Lillian studied the displays, recognizing the implications immediately. You're describing a shadow war. Exactly. And Admiral, we need someone to lead our response. Someone who understands both the tactical and strategic dimensions of this threat. Secretary Williamson's expression was grave. We're offering you command of a new joint task force, Operation Prometheus. Your mission would be to identify, track, and neutralize these networks before they can execute large-scale operations. Lillian felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but this time it carried global implications. Resources? Unlimited. Personnel, equipment, operational authority. whatever you need to prevent another apex situation." Admiral Blackwood leaned forward. "Admiral, this isn't just about regional security anymore. This is about the future of international conflict." Through the carrier's windows, Lillian could see the endless Atlantic horizon, vast and full of unknown challenges. Somewhere beyond that horizon, new threats were emerging, threats that required the kind of unconventional thinking and decisive action that had defined her career. She thought of Colonel Petrov's final sacrifice, the 50,000 civilians in Massacre Valley who would never know how close they'd come to death, and the price of allowing evil to operate in the shadows while good people looked the other way. "Madam Secretary," Lillian said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accepting an impossible mission, "when do I start?" "Thank you for joining Admiral Lillian Foster on this incredible journey through the skies above the Calor Desert. If you enjoyed this epic tale of courage, sacrifice, and the thin line between duty and conscience, please show your support by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. Your subscription helps us bring you more original, full-length stories like this one. Share this story with fellow aviation enthusiasts and military fiction fans, and let us know in the comments what adventures you'd like to see Admiral Foster tackle next. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and your courage in your heart. This is your storyteller, signing off.